Hi, and welcome to part 9 of the Walnut and Maple desk build series. If you followed along up till this point, I've gotten to the point where the case work is all done and all that's left to build on this desk is the drawers. And that's where I'm starting off in this video. The first step of that, of course, is to get all of the stock prepped, milled down, and cut to size. For these drawers, I'm going to be using what leftover walnut I have for the drawer sides, but the drawer fronts are going to be made of this beautiful spalted maple that I found. I'm flipping this over to get the two outside drawers the exact same size since the drawer boxes are the same size, but I am taking care to make sure that I'm keeping them oriented and so that I'll have continuous grain across the drawer faces. Once all my drawer parts are sorted, and before I actually start with any joinery, I make sure to run a dado across the bottom of all of my pieces to account for the drawer bottom. The only exception to that will be the drawer backs, which will actually be trimmed up above the drawer bottom. Here I'm positioning my fence to make sure that it's cutting at the same size as the top of the dado will be on the other pieces. Once all the stock is cut to size, I can move on to getting everything prepped for cutting the dovetails. Now I'm going to be concentrating at first on just the upper drawers, and more specifically I'm going to be concentrating on the front half-blind dovetails for those drawers. I'm also going to be showing how to cut these dovetails on a bandsaw. Okay, so I'm getting ready to cut the dovetails, and I'm just going to do my prep real quick. Now, layout, like always, is important. However, it's significantly easier doing it on the bandsaw. Basically, all I have to do is mark out one piece, because I'll be using a jig that will set the distance, so I only need one piece for reference, and then I only need to mark the end grain so that I can set it up on the bandsaw. And then also, I don't need to use a knife either. Now, the one thing I do need to watch out for is the position of the dado for the bottom panel. I want to make sure that that is contained completely within one of the dovetails. So I'm going to make my first mark here at a 1/4 inch in, and I put the dado up at 3/8, so that'll give me plenty of clearance there. And I'm just going to do it the same on either side. Now on the case, I made all the dovetails the same size. I walked across the set of dividers. That made it easier for doing a big case like this, but on the drawers, I don't like that. I don't want them all to be the same size. I'm going to have one smaller tail in the center and two larger ones on the outside. So basically, I just need to set that distance and mark them out. Okay, so I'm getting ready to make these cuts, and I just want to explain how I'm doing this real quick. So this is the jig that I will be using to make these cuts. It's very simple. Basically, I've got a piece of scrap wood that is cut 90 degrees on one side, and on the other side it's cut, in this case I've got it at about 10 degrees, which is somewhere between a 1:8 and a 1:7 ratio. But I've got that angle, that's the angle of my dovetails essentially, cut on the other side of this. And then at the bottom of it, I have another scrap piece of wood that overhangs a little bit and basically gives me a little bit of a lip that I can rest my piece in. And how I will be doing this is I will lock the drawer side into that little notch and run it up and make my cut with the bandsaw back to my line. Now, setting up the cut on that line isn't super important to have it precise against the line. You want it in that spot because that's where you marked it, but we're cutting the tails first, so whatever distance they are is the distance they are. What is key is consistency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this cut, I'll flip the board, I'll make a second cut, then I'll take and make those same two cuts on all 6 of my drawer sides. After I've made those 2 cuts, I'll adjust my fence and move to the next cut. I'll make 2 cuts on each board, all 6 pieces, then move it again to my last set of cuts. And then that way, every single one of these pieces will be the same. It's a really simple process. And the last step, I can also use the bandsaw to remove the waste from the half pin area, the area on the outside of the outside tails. Now I'm getting ready to do the tails, the half-blind tails on the drawer fronts, and I've already gone and marked out the depth that those tails are. This is the same setting on my marking gauge as I use to mark out the tails. So I've already gone and marked that on both sides, and now the next step is to mark out the thickness of the tails, how far in these need to go. And so I'm going to do that again right off of the tails to set my thickness. I'm just going to set that there. Now the next step is pretty in line with all the other dovetails I've cut in this project, and that's I need to mark them out. Nothing new here. This rabbet that I cut into the end before I cut the dovetails, this is where it really comes in handy, because you can solidly register that up against the drawer front. And then I'm just going to mark it out with a knife, just like I always would. Now the challenge of the half-blind dovetail is removing this waste. You're not just cutting through it, you have to be able to remove the waste and leave it intact. So there's several approaches that you can take. Number one is you can take a saw and cut down at an angle, and then take a chisel and remove the waste. Another thing that you can do, which I've done in a lot of my other drawer fronts, is to use a Forstner bit at the drill press to remove the bulk of the waste. But today I'm going to do it a little bit different, and I'm going to use a router to do it. So I've got all the drawer sides done and all the joinery completed there. But before I can move on to doing the dovetail joints at the back, I actually have to trim up the two sides for this center drawer. I cut them all the same length, which was 19 inches. However, there's a difference in the drawers because of this curve on the front. At the moment, they're basically all sitting square across the front. But on these outside drawers, I'm going to be trimming this drawer to match this curve, and so it has to sit where it is, because on this side it's flush, and then I'll be trimming the extra from the outside. Same with here. However, on this inside one, I need these two outer corners to be flush, and then I'm going to be trimming the center. Right now though, that being the deepest part of the curve, this is sitting out, basically the same width as all the rest. So what I have to do is trim the back of the drawer sides so that I can push this back and make this flush as well. So I've put it in, pushed it all the way to the back, just to confirm that what I have here is 1 inch sticking out. So I want to trim these two sides down to 18 inches to account for that difference so that this drawer can sit back further. Okay, so laying out the back is going to be a little bit different because the drawer backs are cut above the dado for the bottom, so they'll just sit above it. So I have a little bit less material to work with, and also it means that it's going to be asymmetrical. So in other words, what I have, the distance I have at the top versus the bottom is different. So I kind of have to lay each line out individually and make each cut individually rather than just flipping the board over and the same thing side to side. So the cleanup of these is pretty straightforward and pretty similar to if I'd cut them by hand. It actually turns out to be a little bit easier, even though the cuts are straight instead of at an angle, and that's just because the kerf of the bandsaw blade makes it a little bit easier to get the coping saw in there and cut it out. So with all that extra material, you would think that this would be a little bit harder to do with a chisel, but it's actually not, and it goes really quick. I just start paring back, and because that saw kerf comes down to the line, it cuts away pretty easy. Okay, so now that all the joinery is done on the drawers and they're dry fit, I can put them into the case and get them traced out so that I can cut the profiles on the drawer fronts. So what I'm going to do, you can see I've got the sub top and top back off just so that I have access here. And I'm just going to go and trace exactly where I want these to come to, all the way around. But then the center drawer, we'll just have some material move from the middle. Just like on the sub top, I need to harden up this spalted maple that I'm using. So I'm treating it with penetrating epoxy in the same exact way that I treated the sub top, and that's a penetrating epoxy that's been thinned down. Once the epoxy is cured, I can go ahead and get everything sanded and ready for assembly and get these drawers glued up. And this is where I'm going to end this video with the upper drawers complete. In the next and final video, I'm going to be covering the lower drawers, the final finish, and the final assembly of this. If you've stuck with me through all 9 videos of this, I just want to thank you very much for watching. And as a reminder, this whole project is available over on the simplecove.com guild section, where all the plans are available for download.